and welcome back to another edition of YCT Matters. I'm Carol Platt-Liebau, president of Yankee Institute, and today we are delighted to be joined by Bonnie Tiburzi Caputo. And Bonnie is a Connecticut resident, formerly at least. She grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and she is one of the fascinating personalities from Connecticut that you're going to want to know about, because Bonnie was the first female pilot for a major airline. And Bonnie, we are so delighted you could join us on this edition of YCT Matters. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Carol.
So let's just begin at the very beginning, as they say in The Sound of Music, and talk to us about how you got started in what at the time was a very non-traditional field for a female. What was the process? What made you decide you wanted to be a pilot?
I basically was dipped in aviation my whole entire life. My dad was with Air Transport Command down in South America quite a lot of his time. And my brother desperately wanted to become a pilot as well. So they kind of worked on it together. And I was always sort of following them around. Daddy was flying for SAS for a while because my mother was Swedish. So everybody moved to Stockholm. And that's where my brother actually was born. And then he came back, started flying for TWA. So I saw him all the time in Ridgefield. And then he decided he wanted to have start a little air taxi from Danbury, Connecticut to the two airports that we go to, LaGuardia and JFK. And so every weekend I would go out to the airport at Danbury and help Daddy fuel the airplanes, roll them back, do this, do that, all kinds of fun things. Basically just following my father around and following my brother around, because I think Daddy thought it was really cute that I wanted to be a pilot too. But and he always let me sit next to him when we flew places. We'd take a little Cessna 172 that fit 5 little people all together, and we'd go up to Cape Cod and have lobster lunch and then come back to Danbury. And so I just, the whole idea of flying, I was just enamored with the whole thing. And it started when I was quite young, actually.
So what was the process like to become a pilot?
Well, because I was out at the airfield all the time, and it was Daddy's, they call it an FBO, flight operations. And so I got used to the flying, but I finally ended up going to a little airport all by myself when I was 16 years old, actually probably 17 years old. And I knew I could take lessons without my father knowing it, because I wanted to surprise him for his birthday. And so I had a couple of lessons, probably 4 or 5. I hadn't soloed yet, but I had my logbook. And when it was Daddy's birthday, that was his birthday present. And he was thrilled. He was so excited about it and dug out so much paraphernalia that he had. And one was his sunglasses. So when I was flying with American for the 26 years I was there, I always had those sunglasses with me. But that's basically how it started. I just went wherever I could and work and then get lessons. Like I was in Brussels just visiting friends, and I was going to do some au pair work, and I was only probably 17, 18 years old. And I thought, well, I'd really like to start learning to fly. And I met oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it now. Isn't that awful? He was with Sabina Airlines, and he taught people to fly in their, isn't that awful? I can't think of it. That's what happens when you're a senior citizen. You can't come
hardly.
up with
Hardly. So now, what year was it that you went off and to surprise your father for his birthday?
I think that's 1970.
1970.
Yeah.
So the airline world was very different. It was before airline deregulation.
Oh yeah, just
and,
before.
And
Yeah.
things were very different. I have just, I was very, very young back then, but I remember the airline world was very different back then.
Oh yeah, it really was. And it was a simulator. That's what I was trying to tell you. He was teaching in simulators that was not a real airplane. And he said, I'll give you those lessons for free, young lady, if you teach my wife to speak English. So I would go every evening and give her an hour class of English, which I wasn't a teacher at all, but it came through. And he gave me so many lessons in the simulator, and it just, things like that started to roll. It just went on and on. And no matter where I could go and what I could do, I could take lessons from somebody and, and earn the money myself, whether I was babysitting or all kinds of things. And I finally decided, living in Europe, I think my parents shipped me there because they thought I should be learning different languages and becoming stewardesses. They weren't flight attendants yet. And I finally came home from there and went to the little airport in Danbury, Connecticut. Not Danbury, sorry, in Pompano Beach, Florida, because that's where we finally moved down there. And I started taking lessons, and then I learned enough that I could be an instructor there. And then I
A
just kept
flight
going.
and so you, Bonnie, so you learned enough you could be a flight instructor?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And then I got my multi-engine again because I had a businessman came to the little field and said, I've got this twin engine Cessna 310. And if anybody wants to fly it, they'd have to fly me someplace because I don't know how to fly. And I said, well, if you let me take my lessons in that airplane, I'll take you anywhere you want to go for free. So that's how we always bartered things, because I really didn't have a solid job at getting things, doing things back then. And
And so how old were you by this time?
well, by the time I got hired by American, I was 24. So
Okay.
in there, it was between ages 19 and 24.
Okay.
I kept getting different commercial license, seaplane rating, all kinds of stuff, multi-engine.
And so then at a certain point, after you had gotten your flight training, you applied to all the different airlines, correct?
Yes, I did.
So tell us a little about that. What was that process like?
Well, it was difficult because I looked up all the addresses, and I knew the airlines that were taking on and off out of Florida, but not so many. And wasn't very familiar with American. But anyway, I wrote to every single airline, and every single airline turned me down except TWA and American.
And
And
what did they say when they turned you down? Why did they
well,
turn you down?
I won't even tell you which airline that was, but they said, they wrote me back and they said, we will please never write us again because we'll never answer a second letter, and we will never have a woman to fly, for our
I'm s-
airline.
I'm sorry, it caught. They said what?
Yeah, that they would never have a woman flying the airplanes. And this was, again, this was in 1972, towards the end of the year. And you know what I wish, Carol? I wish I had kept all those letters so I could have made a big collage. And it could have been so much fun.
We
But when
have come
America,
such a long way, haven't we? Isn't it wonderful?
oh yeah, oh yeah. Those were my mentors in the early 70s. I mean, I was enamored with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and trying to get a job after she graduated from Harvard and from Columbia. And she could become a professor at Columbia, but uh,
Law
firm
firm?
would hire her.
Right.
And
I think Sandra Day O'Connor had a very similar experience.
very similar, just before her. And then I was watching Janet Guthrie, who became good friends of mine. She was a race car driver, and she was the first one to drive in an Indiana 500, I think it was. But there were so many women doing so many different things. And I kept thinking to myself, well, they're doing it. Why can't I do it? It's just a different. I had a guidance counselor in high school that when I told her, yes, thank you, I do want to go to college, but I also want to be an airline pilot like my father. And she very politely said, well, Miss Tiburzi, if that's what you want to be, you're never going to grow up to be anything. And I thought, okay. But
So
I
you
just,
kept going, and Americans said they'd hire you.
yes, yeah, they were amazing. And I must say, I went through a lot in 8 weeks of training for them, because I worked with guys all the time. But I don't think they were used to having a female there at all. I mean, there was one ladies' room at the academy, and it was up where all the secretaries were. So I'd have to climb up all the stairs and go to the ladies' room there. And finally, they did put a ladies' room thing labeled saying women on one bathroom door. So they kept getting it better. But they I think they were really nervous about, could I pass all of the things that these military guys, they were getting out of Vietnam and they were coming to become airline pilots and get wonderful jobs. And or there were a lot of things that I was always worried about, like if I did flunk out of the training academy for 8 weeks, women may not be hired for quite a long time. I
Yes.
would be giving them a very bad reaction to that. But the first thing they did, the very second day I was at the academy, they called me out of the room where we were being taught, and they wanted me to go into a 707 four-engine jet. And it was again in the simulator, so it wasn't the real airplane. But what they wanted to do was a strength test. They wanted to make sure that as the captain of the airplane, if something happened and we lose two engines on one side, I can get that airplane back.
Right.
And never having flown a four-engine jet before, the chief pilot came out, another guy that was sitting in the co-pilot seat that was going to be my partner supposedly, and then another person in the back, and I think he was FAA, but I'm not really sure with that either. But they got me up to altitude, and then he said, okay, you've got the airplane, and they put the nose down and turned off two engines on one side. So the airplane basically pointed down and started to turn, make a big turn. So my job was to stop it from turning and get it back to altitude. I did everything like that because it's just flying an airplane. It doesn't matter that it had four engines.
Right.
But every time I would take my hands off the yoke, like the steering wheel it is,
Right.
and with my right hand to pull down is a little trim tab that you're supposed to wind up, and that'll get the airplane on its own straight. So every time I let go of one and I'd reach down for the trim that they told me about, and the airplane would dive again. So I tried it one more time. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because I don't have the strength to hold that airplane up. So I
Yes.
looked at myself, and there was one limb that was available, and that was one leg, because I had my one foot on the rudder pedals so that the airplane would stay straight and not turn. And I wrapped my other leg around the yoke because it had a nice pipe right there. And I put my leg there. And so I had a free hand, and I went down and I trimmed the airplane, and it came up and we locked it. And the guys started laughing at me, and they said, we've never seen that before. So I think we should just have lunch.
Well, you figured out a way, and that's all it
Women do
took.
that.
And so when you were at American, you were there for 24 years, right?
25 and a half.
25 and a half. And the period you were there, it was a period of explosive growth for American Airlines, wasn't it?
Well, there were 3,682 pilots when I was hired, and that was my number because I was the youngest person on the seniority list. And then when I left American, there were 15,000 of us. That's
Wow.
a huge number. Yeah,
Wow. And so a lot of what happens and a lot of what determines where you fly and how you fly and everything, it's based on seniority, is that correct?
completely.
So
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we still had flight engineers in airplanes then, because now we have two pilots and a different kind of technology in the
And
airplane.
what did flight engineers do?
We took so I turned out to be a flight engineer, because anybody that was hired at that moment in time, there were 214 of us in that group. We all became flight engineers, and we monitored the fuel, the hydraulics, the pressurization. When the pilots took off, we set all the throttles and everything. So we were basically the engineers on this airplane. And if the flight attendants had a problem with the galley and something's not working, I would go back there with my screwdriver and I would get it fixed somehow. But you just do. And
Yes.
it took me. I was off and on the flight engineer because we had furloughs and then came back and all kinds of things. And it was 6 years before the head of the flight engineer, the chief engineer, Leroy Lennon, the great guy, he called me one day and he said, you know what, Bonnie? I was the first instructor to, I, not, oh, I can't think of it, Carol. Anyway, the first man to uh, teach a woman to be a flight engineer. And I said, wow, congratulations. That's great. He said, yeah, but it was you. It was the first one around the world that ever had their flight engineer rating, which I didn't know that until 6 years later. But
That is amazing.
yeah, it's so funny. But by then I was flying co-pilot, and we were back and forth because we had all kinds of problems with the airlines and
And
um
and and
anyway.
and Bonnie, so tell me, so what were your relationships with the stewardesses like? Did they resent your being a pilot, or were they rah rah go Bonnie? What was that like?
I think it was a combination of that because the stewardesses, they were stewardesses at the time, and they were having a tough time. I read a book all about stewardesses too, when I was wanting to become a pilot, because in the late 60s, they were trying so hard to get, union rights and all kinds of things going. Instead of, okay, you can't be married, you can't have anything that's up, above your knees, you can't have babies, and goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and like the weight requirements and
Oh
all
my
of
gosh,
that
that
seemed
was the
very
word.
stringent, right?
Yeah. And when you turn 35, you're canceled. You
Yeah.
just don't stay that long. So they were working really hard at that too. And I think they kind of ignored me in the very beginning, but we all became friends. It really turned out to be, the camaraderie of it all was wonderful. And I have to admit, the guys were great. They teased me a lot in a lot of different. One guy put a 10-pound weight in my flight bag, and I'm carrying it around because all the flight attendants then were using their little, wheelies, and all the guys just carried it. And so I thought, I can't carry it. I better carry my flight bag too. And I was in the plane one day, and I get a call from a company on the company radio, and he said, "Hey, Tiburzi, check your flight bag." And I thought, okay, something's, and I dug it all up, and sure enough, there's a 10-pound weight at the bottom of my bag.
But, it's nice to know that everyone was, pretty on the whole, like, they just teased you and brought you along like everybody else.
Oh yeah, yeah, they did,
Yeah.
but we helped each other. We were at school together, and if they had needed a trim on their hair, and I didn't really know how to do it, but I did it, or help them with their laundry, all kinds
Yeah.
of things. We worked together, and we
Yep.
ran together, swam together. We did everything, which is
Yeah.
really wonderful.
Yes. Yes. And so then after 25 and a half years, you made the decision to retire at 50. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I really miss flying, but you know, my children were in middle school,
Mhm.
and I was, on a 757 and a 767, and I was flying to Europe, and I was flying to South America, and I was leaving, the house more often than I should. And
And what is that schedule like, Bonnie?
oh, I mean, it's great fun if if you're flying. It depends on how many hours you're flying, and it goes anywhere from or did years ago. So it could have changed now because I've been retired for 25 years, but anywhere from 65 to 80 hours a month. And I would go for short hours so that I could still be at home with the kids. But I think there's a place in your life, Carol, that all of a sudden something else gets very exciting for you. And
Mhm.
for me, it was my children. And I
Yes.
loved watching them in their sports games and what they brought home from, from school and everything. Or every time I went there, matter of fact, I got to see them so often. My poor son, he said, "Mom, just don't acknowledge me unless I'm getting punched or something. Then you can come over. But other you
Yep.
don't see me." So, but yeah, no, I loved it, and the kids when anyway. I was happy that when they went to college or went to the senior years at school, I was there for them, and that
Yes.
was a thrilling experience for me.
Yes. Yes. I think it is just a very wonderful gift to be able to have the ability to be there. And did you ever regret the decision to be home and to do that?
No, Carol, I loved every minute of it. It just knowing I used to laugh. It was a poor, rainy, miserable day, and I thought, I know Cruise is not going to call me to have me ferry an airplane someplace, or because even if you're senior enough where you can bid for a really good trip, and if I had stayed at American, I would have been number one on the seniority list. But I gave up those 10 years, and I'd much rather have been at home with the children. I finally got to do what I wanted to do, be an airline pilot, and then I really wanted to be a wife and a mother, and it couldn't be nicer.
It is interesting because there are only a couple of people for whom you are truly irreplaceable, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
And so I know I've always been grateful that my job gives me the flexibility to be around for my children as well. And so it is. It's interesting the kind of trade-offs you make, but I think it makes a lot of sense in the end.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, when you look back on your memories as a pilot for American, what are some of the most vivid memories you have, or some of the trips you took, or some of the things you did that come back most, in the most dazzling detail, Bonnie?
Well, I think, gosh, I loved the flying part was always fun. If we had an issue or something was a little problem, the passengers would never know because we know how to put that puzzle together. And as a team, you're sitting there in the airplane going across the Atlantic, and you've got three of you sitting there talking and negotiating. The camaraderie of it and the mindset and how well you fit all those little pieces of the puzzle together. It's so rewarding at the end of the day when you're there. Um, I actually also had a passenger. We were halfway across the Atlantic. We were going to Paris, and the flight attendants finally come up and say, we have a passenger. He's finally, blanked out, and his wife is complaining. She wants to, turn around to New York because he's probably going to have a heart attack, and his cardiologist is there, and she's going to sue me, and had all kinds of things going on. And I said, you know what? We've gone more than halfway. I can't make a 180 and go back. We've got to keep going. But Keflavik, in Iceland was just to 90 degrees to us. But by the time we negotiated the wind there and what was going on there, knowing that we're not going to be able to land at that airport, we're going to have to just keep going. So we picked, different, like London and all kinds of different places as we kept going, slowly kept going. They did find a doctor on board, and he went ahead and did all kinds of things and said, okay, he's okay. And I said, all right, well, please, to the flight attendants, get the doctor up in the cockpit. It's not regulations, but I want him to talk to the medical department at Dallas, blah, blah, blah. And so they did, and they talked about everything. And he said, he's going to be fine. We've got ambulances come when we get to the airport and everything. So I said, well, are you a cardiologist? Are you a neurologist? And what do you do? We're so grateful for you. He said, oh, no, I'm just going to Paris to work for Chanel. I'm a dermatologist. Hey, he's a doctor. So
Hey, it works. It works. They
that's
all had to go to medical school, I guess, before they specialized.
have things like that to go on that you're never going to forget. And
Yes.
it was great fun. I've got to say, another thing, I look back my very first flight with Captain Almeida, and I was a flight engineer. We landed in Chicago, and we had to stay there for 2 hours, and then we were going to go to California, and we were in the 27, so we had to stop. We couldn't go nonstop. And the captain got out of the plane and said, Bonnie, the pilot's lounge is for men only. And the other one is for stewardesses, women only, but if you're a stewardess. So I don't know where you want to go. And I thought, well, that's embarrassing. So I just walked down the aisle, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to go to find flight operations someplace and sit there in a chair and wait for my next flight. And all of a sudden, down in this long corridor, I see all these pilots out in the hallway, laughing, joking, going into their lounge, coming back out, doing things. And I keep walking. I was so embarrassed, and I just sort of acknowledged hello. And they said hello. And one guy said, oh, and look at that. And I looked up, and it said male crew only. And then in smaller letters, and it said Bonnie too. So
Oh,
I didn't go in. I was a little embarrassed then, but I said, I'll see you later, and it couldn't have been nicer. And that was the moment in time that I really felt like I was part of this whole thing, that I was a
yes,
pilot, and I just didn't happen to be a female pilot. I was a pilot, and that's all there is
absolutely.
to it.
And Bonnie, as you talk about all of this, it's so interesting because you really were and are a pioneer and a trailblazer. And you did face these kinds of obstacles. You did face those kinds of letters where they said, "Don't write us again. You can't do this. You're a woman." Most women, I think, of our generation have at least an experience or two like that, and everyone chooses how she will respond, you know? And what I admire about you is the way you chose to respond. Everyone faces adversity in life of one sort or another, and everyone makes the decision. Will you let it make you bitter, or will you let it make you better? And you clearly chose to let it make you better.
Oh, I
And
have, yeah. I
and,
think you have a smile on your face and just consider the source and forget it. Somebody else has their own issues, but um,
I think that's right. And, letting that kind of thing hold you back or hold you down, then really what you've done is hand the power over to the people who have the problem themselves instead of, and why would you ever do that?
yeah, you have to, if you don't mind, let me see if I have my little, I gave a talk at a school recently, and they sent me this wonderful little card. And every single thank you note was all about. He said, "Your story inspired me to keep pursuing what I really want to do." And these are young girls that are 11, 12 years old. And so every time I got a little thank you like that, it just gives me chills. It makes me so happy that being, you know, today everybody needs mentors. It's wonderful that somebody's there
Yes.
to sit down with them and talk. I didn't have any mentors that I could reach. Most of them were gone already, like Harriet
Mhm.
Quimby, who was a pilot. And then you have Amelia Earhart, and then you have Bessie Coleman, who's the first Black person on the planet to get a license. And so I always think of them as pioneers and trailblazers, but they made my whole career, because I kept thinking to myself, if they can do it, I certainly can. And it worked.
Absolutely, and all of us, in the end, we're all so blessed. Here we are in whatever the issues are, the freest, the fairest country on earth, and really, any of us, the opportunities are truly unlimited, and Connecticut, I have to say, Bonnie Tiburzi, Connecticut is so proud of you for being a trailblazer, for being the first female pilot for a major airline. And we are so grateful to you for having spent a few minutes with us on why CT matters. Connecticut is proud of you. Ridgefield, daughter of Ridgefield, Ridgefield is proud of you. So, anyway, and we thank all of you, our listening and now viewing audience, for joining us. This is Carol Platt-Liebau. We look forward to having you with us on the next edition of Why CT Matters.